terribly sorry about not getting slides together for everybody today. I will endeavor to get those and circulate those for next week. But we were called into a number of incidents that occurred that had really serious consequences, and they're playing out as I speak now. I'm going to touch on SolarWinds and the recent CrowdStrike incident, because these things are still playing out before everyone's eyes. And we never really know what the full implications are until some time later, and sometimes not at all. But if we go back to, everyone's familiar with the SolarWinds cyber attack that happened, it first appeared in December 2020, when SolarWinds suffered a major cyber attack. And I wrote a paper for the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time in January 2021. And 3 months later, everything I wrote was proven to be fact. And what had actually happened is, cybercrime is quite easy to prevent. And although that doesn't go down very well with people that spend their life trying to prevent it, it's normally because they're very busy doing things that are reactive as opposed to proactive. So they're not preventing the cyber attacks, they're addressing them. And we use the term digital whack-a-mole often, frequently. So in SolarWinds' case, SolarWinds were guilty. We managed to identify 13 subdomains that SolarWinds had, which were not secure. And when I say not secure, you'll be familiar with the URL address bar in the top of any web page. These were shown as not secure, and they had a number of reasons for that. They were either an expired certificate, or they HTTP wasn't redirecting to HTTPS, and so on and so forth. But what that meant was that these subdomains were totally exposed for any of the OWASP top 10 type of cyber attacks from anyone in the world. And this is the really key part. Although sometimes it can be a script kiddie literally in his basement next door, nation states, whether it be, choose your country, Russia, China, Iran, Korea, whichever you choose, they have literally warehouses full of people surfing the internet looking for gaps and exposed positions to exploit. They typically start with subdomains, websites that somebody has either forgotten about or misconfigured, or they've allowed a digital certificate to expire. We can go back into Stuxnet, which really highlighted all of this back in 2008, 2009. But in 2020, what happened is SolarWinds were found to have had a cyber attack by default, and it wasn't as if they were monitoring and controlling their internet assets. A provider came along and identified that they'd been suffered a cyber attack because of SolarWinds errors, and we can use the word amongst our friends, I'm sure, negligence, because that's the bottom line. They had not managed and controlled their internet assets. At the same time as a subdomain was taken over at SolarWinds, they also suffered a DNS attack. Now, DNS, for those that don't know, is domain name systems. And I'm going to go into some detail about DNS, because people often ask me, Andy, why don't people know about DNS more? And I'll give you a very black and white answer to that. And some of you might acknowledge it. Some of you might not be happy about it. But nonetheless, these are the facts. DNS was first invented in 1983 to 1986 by Dr. Paul Mockapetris. And what DNS does, in simple terms, is humans are very good at remembering names, google.com, for example, Microsoft.com, for example, but they're not very good at remembering a full set of numbers punctuated by dots. DNS was invented by Paul Mockapetris to address that, because computers, unlike humans, don't work with text. They work with numbers. Okay, so they work with binary code, zeros and ones. So DNS translates the URL, the unique resource locator, the web address, into numbers, so a computer can go looking for the web address that corresponds with the URL. In the case of DNS, Fast forward from 86 to the mid-90s, when public key infrastructure, PKI, was perfected to authenticate through the use of digital certificates a user or a machine. The two of them went hand in hand. So PKI and DNS were, if you like, the digital passports of the entire internet and the entire digital world. Equally, no more than you'd want to allow 5 million people in your country without a passport or some referenceability, you wouldn't want the same situation to occur in your digital landscape, your network, or your infrastructure. Nevertheless, that's what's happening because people lack the expertise. So going back from 83 to 86, DNS was perfected. It rolled out and became the de facto gold standard globally for the identification and utilization for the internet. So it wasn't long after that that obviously 9/11 came around, a matter of 15 years or so. And under Bush as the president of America at the time, and then Obama, the desire was on massive digital dominance and to enable surveillance. Again, I'm not going to be too contentious with this. You've got your own opinions on what surveillance should or shouldn't be and how intrusive or inintrusive it should be. But nonetheless, DNS and PKI was seen to be very good technologies and capabilities for surveillance by various parties to enable unfettered access to networks and infrastructure. Fantastic. Great. Everyone could keep an eye on everyone. It's where the term Big Brother came from. So after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, DNS became the favored de facto standard for governments around the world to monitor and control activities, banking, finance, emails, anything you can imagine. So no longer was it the old school days from the CIA where they were doing telephone taps and wires. This was pure and simple digital eavesdropping on an unprecedented scale and level. So then fast forward to our friends at SolarWinds. SolarWinds, because during the 2000s and 2010s, you will struggle to find any academic facility that teaches these areas to any depth. And the reason for that is because the surveillance governments wanted, they didn't want people to be able to close the doors. Therein lies our problem. So SolarWinds happens, and trust me, SolarWinds suffered a cyber attack as early as 2018, for a year and a half before the attack was surfaced. And we got a situation whereby a website was attacked, and it's actually called a domain admin access, and it was taken over, command control, and the actual web address was avsvmcleod.com, but it was actually a SolarWinds subdomain. My first book goes into some depth on this. So bad guys had access and control of a website, a SolarWinds website. They also had control of the servers, the domain name system servers that would, again, remember, translating the URLs to IP addresses, IPv4 or IPv6. And they had full command control of the data flow in and out of SolarWinds to do as they wished. Okay. So sometime thereafter, we wrote the paper for the Senate Intelligence Committee. I also wrote a book in 2021. We were all suffering with COVID-19 lockdown, so it seemed a very good opportunity for me to do so. That book is titled Stuxnet to Sunburst, 20 Years of Digital Exploitation, and that pretty much sums up what happened. We can go back into Stuxnet. If anyone wants to ask questions on that, I'd be glad to answer those. So when we looked at SolarWinds' position, and we reached out to their CEO who departed, they'd just been replaced at the time, and we reached out to Tim Brown, the CISO, who had been at SolarWinds for some time, and we shared information, threat intelligence, as we tend to do on a daily basis, whether it be the FBI, the FAA, NCSC, whomever. We share threat intelligence, and because there's this huge gray area of DNS, a lack of knowledge, it tends to fall through the cracks. So command control is often lost through DNS, and there's a challenge whereby some parties will know, some parties won't want to know, and some parties don't want you to know. You can understand where the dilemma is. So that was SolarWinds. In May of 2021, Tim Brown, the CISO of SolarWinds, finally listened to us and addressed their top-level domain, the TLD of SolarWinds.com, and made their DNS servers secure. Hallelujah. Great job. It's only 6 months too late. Or actually, it was over 2 years too late. So we've got this challenge from 2001 all the way to date, where DNS was very poorly educated, very poorly understood, considered to be dealt with by little men in dark rooms down at the end of the corridor, and was being exploited by governments for surveillance. Along came a chap by the name of Edward Snowden, who, after a period of time, you will recall, if you love him or hate him, it's immaterial. He decided that enough was enough and surveillance was too intrusive. It took away all privacy. And there's always been this balance between privacy and security, which doesn't always sit well for the end user, as we know. Consequently, in his first book, Edward Snowden's first book called Permanent Record, if you've not read it, I suggest you should. As I say, it doesn't matter whether you love him or hate him or think he's a martyr or a treasonous so-and-so. It doesn't much matter. What really came out was what had been going on at the NSA and GCHQ for many, many years in the surveillance world. And what then happened is from 2012, 2013, when he wrote his first book, you'll see cybercrime went through the roof. Literally went like a hockey stick straight up in terms of costs and losses and cyber attacks. So that's just around a decade or so. What Edward Snowden had done in his book was reveal in many ways how the NSA and GCHQ had used the internet for surveillance. And what our adversary said, well, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. And what they started doing was manipulating and tampering DNS and the internet for nefarious gain. SolarWinds was one of the biggest cyber attacks that came out of that, and they suffered a PKI attack that exploited invalid digital certificates and a DNS attack that exploited insecure servers. We can go into the Electoral Commission that had the same problem. TfL, only this week, I'll touch on TfL in a minute. TfL have exactly the same situation. Their servers are not secure, and I promise you, when I wrote to their CEO, Andy Lord, in August of 2023 to warn him, they paid lip service to it. Well, here we are just over a year later, and millions of London commuters are going to suffer because of their lack of action and lack of adoption. Nonetheless, back to SolarWinds. So SolarWinds, 6 months after the event, an 85% loss of their valuation. They went down, their shares devalued by 85%, which is one of the world's worst ever situations. Some very naughty, I call it insider trading, you can call it what you want, but 2 days before the announcement of the SolarWinds cyber attack, $273 million worth of shares were sold by SolarWinds to the Canadian pension fund. They went down 85% in value pretty damn quickly. So you've got people in Canada reliant on the pension fund they put into all their life, struggling financially because the pension funds almost collapsed. So the repercussions, the real sadness for me about cybersecurity and cybercrime is it becomes yesterday's fish and chip newspaper wrapper. It really does, because 1 minute we've got, a major cyber attack at the Electoral Commission with 41 million UK citizens, and people go, "Oh, I never heard about that." Really? Well, everyone's exposed because of it. Capita, Royal Mail, and so on and so forth. So it just compounds on. It was a pleasure to see Tim Brown at SolarWinds finally address their top-level domains servers, but they didn't go far enough. SolarWinds remain as exposed today to cyber intrusion, digital intrusion, because they're still maintaining not secure subdomains. I could show you in a heartbeat, but I won't, because it would worry me that someone might have other active plans that might be watching this. Equally, they have servers that are not their top level domain that are not secure. Now, what does that mean? Let me explain that a little bit for anyone that doesn't understand how a domain and a subdomain interact together. They're like a chain. The top level domain, the TLD, sits at the top, and in this case, it's SolarWinds.com. I liken it to this. Think of a telephone company, a mobile phone company, that each year bring out a new Apple iPhone. They may want to set up a new subdomain to cater purely for that footfall and the sale of a new product or service, and that will be a subdomain. That subdomain equally must be as secure as the top level domain, or it can provide what we all know as backdoor access. Okay, so any group of subdomains, and I think from memory, SolarWinds have about 300. Each one of those 300 need to be secure. And the attack exploited one of the 300 that weren't secure and stood up avsvmcloud.com. Privileged access to such positions gives total access, potentially with some lateral movement, to the entire infrastructure and network of that organization. You will see in November 2021, the FBI, I'm doing some work for the FBI right now, so I'm not being cruel on anyone. This is public information I'm sharing with you. In 2021, November, the FBI sent 100,000 emails that were phishing emails. Okay. The FBI didn't send them, but their servers were used to send them because the servers weren't secure. Somebody took over command control, C2 as we know it, and sent the emails. And now the beautiful thing for that, and this is where phishing emails have become a lot more mature, they don't try and spoof and change a little bit here or there. They actually take over the server. So it's now an internal email. It's not an external saying warnings, this started life from external. This is the server. The benefit to that, of course, is that that server will contain all the email addresses. So the FBI in November 2021 sent 100,000 emails with malicious code to recipients that were expecting FBI emails because they'd received FBI emails before. You can imagine the challenge that caused. We helped the FBI on that occasion, as we have done a number of occasions. Unfortunately, they don't take a proactive, they take, like the vast majority of organizations around the world, they take a reactive stance and go, oh my goodness, we didn't know, which is a really dangerous position and why we're losing $32 billion a day to cybercrime. A day, okay? So SolarWinds addressed it finally, some of it. We've been helping the SEC. For those that know, there's a major lawsuit and case against SolarWinds. Their executive teams, there certainly should be one for insider trading because they knew about the attack 2 days before going public with it, but were still selling shares. That's really, really naughty. But they only addressed some of the problems. So it's one of those things, and look, we're all grown people here. People don't like to be told they've got an ugly child. Okay? And it's the nicest way I can say it. So when someone comes along and says to the CISO or the CEO, you've got a problem, we're here to help, and they are either emasculated, typically they're men, they're emasculated, or they are egotistic and their ignorance they don't want other people to know about, so they push away. That doesn't stop the security exposure. It just delays it, potentially. Exactly the same with the Transport for London. You can have a copy of my email, 23rd of August, 2023, Mr. Andy Lord. We connected on LinkedIn, and I sent him the information with the threat intelligence that was redacted, but it clearly showed that the servers of TfL were identical with the servers that were used to exploit the Electoral Commission. And funny enough, they all go back to Redmond. Think about that for 1 minute. Why is our data for the National Health Service, TfL, the Electoral Commission, why is all of our data going to Redmond for collation, to insecure servers? Think about that for one moment. You've got a problem. So let's move on from SolarWinds. I could wax lyrical for hours about SolarWinds and what they have and haven't done, what they should or shouldn't do. But the reality is SolarWinds are still in business today purely because they are not too big to fail in as much of their valuation, but their dependency or the reliance by the US government on SolarWinds for certain areas. Equally, you may be aware that I think it was 18,000 companies suffered a consequential cyber attack through SolarWinds, including the Treasury for the United States. I mean, the serious and gravity of these situations cannot be underplayed, although, as I say, sadly, it's yesterday's news. That's the real sad fact. So let's park SolarWinds. We can debate it. We can discuss it as much as you want. Now let's look at the CrowdStrike situation that happened only about 6 weeks ago now, I believe. CrowdStrike issued updates, and for those that are technical, you'll know that those utilize what's known as the WSUS, which is the Windows Server Update Systems. And what they do is the updates, whether it be for a Patch Tuesday for Microsoft or for any organization that uses these, Microsoft is pretty ubiquitous across the world. So companies sign up to the WSUS service, and about 10 years ago, Microsoft would never push anything out without finally checking it themselves. Unfortunately, Microsoft have gone a bit like Boeing. If you read about Boeing, they're saying that the level of quality control is far less than it used to be, and we're seeing doors falling out of the sky, etc., because of that. And Microsoft have taken a similar stance, and we've become, not I, but the world has become more absolutely fascinated and focused on profits at the cost of security. So when CrowdStrike issued a incorrect update for their clients, definitely tens of thousands of clients, they all received some code that wasn't working, and we saw a global outage. They addressed it pretty quickly, which was pretty damn good. But here's the biggest problem. The Microsoft servers that were used for pushing out the updates, they're compromised. And on this occasion, the CrowdStrike software updates weren't containing malware, but they could have been. Okay, so we're in talks with some attorneys about this, so I can't be too specific. But where organizations and air carriers and even I'm in Virginia Water, even my local ticket machine couldn't function because it used CrowdStrike's software. So the repercussions of that activity was a hell of a warning sign that if malicious code had been inserted, which it could have easily been, to the updates, or any updates for that matter, the severity and the outage could have been for days, weeks, months, or more. That would have brought critical infrastructure to a standstill. Because it's interesting, for those of you that remember the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack. Do you remember that? The Colonial Pipeline cyber attack only impacted their accounting office. People go, oh, we couldn't get oil, we couldn't get fuel, we couldn't get... That wasn't true. All it was Colonial didn't know how they could invoice for the fuel, so they stopped pumping it. Okay? And again, this is down to profitability and revenues. So they knew that the people would come back for the fuel. They wouldn't go somewhere else. They didn't have an option. They were pumping gas, etc., for that whole region. But because they couldn't invoice it, they've said, halt production, turn it off. So you've got this dilemma, constant dilemma of outages impacting The symptom and the causes are two different things frequently. I know one airline is suing CrowdStrike for $500 million in losses, and others are suing for other things too. I personally have exchanged more emails with George Kurtz, the CEO of CrowdStrike, pre their flotation for 11 billion and post. And I've been alerting them, as I did TFL and others, that their servers aren't secure. Let's look at that, because I was with the former Secretary of State yesterday. He said, Andy, how can these companies ignore this information? And I said, let me explain. Some of you will be old enough to remember, and have been in this industry for some time, to go back to around 2009, 2010, whereby everyone had their own data centers. It was a pain in the backside. You had to find the building, build the building. You had to stock the building with computers and servers. You had to man it. You had to cool it. It was a pain. In around 2008, 2009, you'll also remember there was a video store called Blockbusters. Okay, and you used to, and indeed you bought vinyl records or DVDs or CDs at the time. Everything changed. And as much as I'm a cynic, I'm going to tell you why I think that happened, not only for financial reasons, but for surveillance, massive data collection capability. Two things here. One, companies, because of this huge desire and focus on revenues and profitability and bonuses, what happened is it was seen for the Akamai's of the world, the Cloudflares of the world, it was seen for them to sell, moving from a CapEx model, a capital expenditure model, onto an operating model, an OpEx model. So, for example, I'm going to use round figures. If a company spent 100 million on a data center a year, that would come off of their CapEx. That would be capital expenditure. If Cloudflare or Akamai or any AWS, any of the others came along and said, we can provide you and give you joint tenancy in our own data centers, there'd be no latency, you'll have no CapEx costs, you just sign a 5-year term, so it's renting, not buying. People were signing up to that. And guess what? The executive teams were sharing out the disparity between the CapEx and the OpEx cost on an annual bonus payment, because it was seen to be more profitable. Now, the fact they were tied up for 15, 20, 30 years, whatever, and the price was going up and up and up, they'd be retired before it even started equating to what the CapEx costs were. So it was good business for them. First thing. Second thing, as the DNS, because people don't understand DNS, as the DNS started to play out and become an issue, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, the world's #1 agency, actually issued an emergency directive in 2019, as late as 2019, on DNS tampering and abuse, because the vast majority of US federal agencies suffered a DNS attack. They couldn't hide from the fact anymore. Okay, a lot of this will be news to you. I live and breathe this every day. So CISA issued this DNS tampering attack. Now you've got GCHQ, NSA, and others that run something they call PDNS, which is supposed to be protective domain name systems. And it's supposed to protect you from nefarious actions. But the challenge with that is it's a little bit like a CVE or a blacklist. It's only reactive. It's not proactive. So, for example, if you got Patch Tuesday in January of this year and you still haven't patched it, was that information that was actionable? Yes, it was. Have you done it? No, you haven't. So it's a reactive scenario. But the point being is it's becoming on people's radar. But there's still this generation gap from 86 to now where people weren't looking at this area. It's critical. Everything happens using DNS. So if we then look at the situation that CISA told the world about, we've got the people migrating to latency issues and outsourcing DNS and CDN, content distribution network, I liken these organizations to the digital equivalent of FedEx or DHL. Okay? They're virtually identical. The difference being is DHL and FedEx shift physical packets. The others, the CDNs, the content distribution network providers, distribute digital packets. In the same breath, I'm going to say this very simply. In both cases, physical and digital should be sent by the sender, received by the recipient, untouched, untampered. In the digital world, they're not. Therein lies cybercrime. Okay? So if in the equivalent of DHL, if I was to send Larry a package and said, Larry, look, this is between you and I'm sending you a package, and you received it, it was unopened, and that was fine. You opened it, you were pleased with what I sent you, etc., that's fine. But if it was tampered and it had been ripped open and resealed and the contents changed, you say, Andy, hold on, someone's got at it. It's been tampered with. In the digital world, people rarely know and rarely look. Okay, that's the difference. So what you then get is this massive false narrative that, yes, Russia, China, Iran, Korea, they do cyber attack as nation states. Where do you think they learned their tradecraft? They learned it from our teams. The difference being is that they want to use it for nefarious purposes, whereas our teams, our agencies, want to use it for surveillance and controls for, could be an election, could be different opinions, it could be loads of different things. We're all aware of what's going on in the social media world. So now we've got this dilemma that it's got so bad. You know, it's literally every day. Yesterday, 20 banks in Iran, the day before TFL, and last week this, and every day we're getting this news. When I started in this industry 6 years ago, it would be 1 or 2 or maybe 3 incidents a week. Now it's 1 to 3 every day, sometimes more. And as I say, if we look back to what happened at the beginning of COVID in 2020, the cybercrime global costs were attributed to be around $3 trillion. To give you some idea of that number, the UK's annual GDP is around $6 trillion, $6 trillion, yeah, pounds equivalent. It's now at over 10. It's trebled in 3 years the amount of cybercrime costs and losses, and people are looking at each other wondering how that's happening. In April of this year, I was invited to chair a meeting in Denmark, and this was a very pertinent thing. And I'm not beating up on anyone, okay? I'm just talking generally and openly. In Denmark, I arrived in Copenhagen, and I was told it was a very prestigious event. I was going to chair the meeting with a panel of 4 people, and as an AI cybersecurity expert, I would be posing questions and asking the panel about their views on AI's use in cyber, etc. So there were 60 attendees, all paying thousands of euros, and they were all attendees. They were CROs, chief risk officers, CIOs, chief information officers, and CISOs, chief information security officers. That was it. That was the makeup. And they were from Denmark's top 60 companies. There were 3 vendors there. They were paying thousands to be there, and 60 guests, me and 4 panel. This room was beautiful. It was huge. It was right on the river in Copenhagen. So everyone sits down and everyone's, chatting away. So I introduce myself and the panel, and I ask, can I pose 2 questions to the esteemed members of the audience? And they said, absolutely, please do. I said, and then we'll start. We had all day. So I said to them, we're in this beautiful big room, and it was massive room. The 60 people were only taking about a third of the room. I said, let me ask you this. How did you get into this room? They thought I was crazy. What on earth are you asking that question for? So I said, bear with me, please. My method will become clear. How did you get into this room? And they all said, well, through the pair doors, those doors. So I said, right, that's cybercrime. If you don't get in, you can't take any data. That's as simple as it gets. I said, and then let me ask you one more question. Thank you for bearing with me. How many of you control, manage, and understand completely domain name systems? Okay. Let me retrack. Top 60 companies in Denmark paying thousands, CIOs, CROs, and CISOs. 6 people out of 60 put their hand up. That means 90% of the audience weren't controlling, weren't managing, and weren't knowledgeable on DNS. That translates to 90% of the companies in Denmark don't have security where it is critical at their internet assets. Okay, so they are literally slaves to security. They have no idea what attacks are going on, very limited knowledge of what their servers are or aren't doing, and they're not even bothering to look. So they all look at each other and they go, what, we're missing something here. I said, yes, you are. So the point I'm making here is what I'm saying to some of you may be new. What I'm saying to some of you may be, oh, we've known this forever, Andy. The reality is the internet is totally reliant upon DNS to work, to function, for this conference to take place, for every email you send, for every website you visit. Without DNS, it doesn't work. So when DNS attacks occur, and the first one was around 2013 that's notable, it may have happened before that, but see how that coincided with Edward Snowden's book and revelation. These are known as DDoS attacks, denial of service or distributed denial of service. And what that means is the servers are so overloaded and potentially taken over that they can't function or perform their duty. And you get an outage. That's typically a DNS attack. In 2013 into 2014, the world's #1 DNS provider in the old style, not AWS, Google, Microsoft, and others, in the old style was a company called Dyn. Americans pronounce it Dyn. I call it DIN, but it's DYN. And Dyn provided DNS services, DNS lookups for all of the big companies, YouTube, Cisco, and all of the big companies. And on a particular day in 2013, they suffered a DDoS attack, which was a DNS attack. And they were the world's foremost DNS providers. DIN were not managing their own DNS servers. Okay, so now comes a big question. Google bought them, I think, in a fire sale within 6 weeks for 600 million. The implications of this stuff going wrong is so severe. And I think if you do some research, you'll find that there is a cost per hour for the internet to be down. And it's in the billions because of the trade and the commerce that goes on through the internet. We all rely on the internet for everything. It's a very dangerous position to be in, but nonetheless, that's what we do. So then if you look at what Google took, not Google, our friends Oracle took on DIN, and both Oracle and DIN are still not secure and still have insecure servers to this day. So the challenge and dilemma here is the big tech giants don't ask for forgiveness. They don't ask for permission. But by virtue of not doing the job as well as they should do, they make the vast majority of the world insecure and exposed. And therein lies a problem. It's almost the tail is wagging the dog. So as we'll all be aware of surveillance, back in Bush's era, Microsoft, Google, Apple all played a part within that capability. And backdoors were rife. You've only got to watch some films with Jason Bourne or others, and you'll see they're actually showing, they're telling you what's true, but people not quite sure what's going on, but it's actually fact. So therein lies a problem. And look, let me put my hand up. I talk to intelligence agencies all the time, and I've no problem with their surveillance. I think they've gone too far. Yes, I do. But I understand the rationale. to an extent. I don't agree with the abuse. I don't agree with the manipulation, but nonetheless, that's where we are with that. What I do object to is that the very same servers and DNS positions that are used for surveillance are done so being insecure, allowing nefarious actors to come in and take the same data and then to hold it to ransom. So in years to come, it will be proven that what I'm saying to you are servers, for example, like United Healthcare Group that have spent $1.5 billion after their cyber attack earlier this year. Their servers were being used for manipulation and tampering of surveillance to build data. One only has to ask, why does the National Health Service's data for you, me, and everyone else in the UK, why is that sent out through Palo Alto to Redmond? What do they need our National Health Service data for? You've got to ask the question. And therein lies another problem, because we're no longer in part of the GDPR, but nonetheless, we still have privacy regulations. I think who was fined the other day by the Danish government? I think it was 280, was it Uber? 283 million for GDPR violations. But then let's look at that, because we can wax lyrical about this for hours. When a company pays a fine, let's say the regulator takes the company on and says, yeah, you've done a bad job, like Sellafield. We actually helped the Office of Nuclear Regulators to show their servers of Sellafield, and they suffered a cyber attack late last year, as public information shows. Sellafield pleaded guilty. They had nowhere to go. What we do is facts. It's not subjective, it's not an opinion, it's not bias, it's facts. So Sellafield pleaded guilty, and they're going to be fined in a few weeks' time by the ICO, but they're all part of the Quango government scenario, so I'm sure it'll go one way or another, but it won't be too severe. But here's the problem. Who pays those fines? Think about that for a minute. So you get a cyber attack, and SolarWinds or one of the UK companies pays a fine, and that fine comes off of their profits. Those profits are then reduced their tax. Those taxes then reduce the coffers that the government receive. The government then say, we cannot afford to pay out these various things like cutting the grass or sidewalks or street lights or what. So the taxpayer is actually paying the fines for cybersecurity costs, fines, and losses. That's something we really need to address, because we're fast approaching the digital Rubicon, and there won't be any way coming back. So we've got this scenario with SolarWinds, CrowdStrike, and anyone else in between you'd like to care to mention. They are all making assumptions, and our own governments are really bad at doing this. The procurement teams within organizations are not doing due diligence. They're making assumptions. And to be honest with you, even your IT auditors of the Big Four and others, no disrespect to anybody, they wouldn't know what to look for to do the due diligence in the first place. And herein lies a challenge, because going back to the DNS, I don't know about you people, but I think of a generation as around 25 years, 25 to 30 years. If we then look at from 86 to now, you've got 2 generations roughly. It's certainly within 2 generations. But if a CISO, for example, who may have credentials, and one of my team, he's got 88 certifications. He's got 6 degrees. He was the man. He was one of the first ever cyber warriors for the United States Air Force. He's the man who had his finger on the nuclear button during the Cold War. Okay, so he's a very senior guy. He'd be the first to say, when he wrote a paper in 2019, as recent as 2019, he had never really understood or been taught with 88 certifications what DNS was about. Now, you can imagine when I go along to Lloyd's of London and I say to John Neal, the CEO, John, you've got a problem with your servers, they're totally exposed, and you've got a Russian infiltration within your server DNS. And he goes to his CISO, who has lacked this education, And the CISO says, oh, he's just trying to blow smoke or sell us something. So they shut you down. The severity and the gravitas of the exposure remains because the CISO is too entranced in knowing what he knows and believing he knows better, but his ignorance and ego allow him to be sidelined. And in 2022, Lloyds did actually suffer a cyber attack, as did TfL after we told them 13 months ago. There's a real challenge. When I started in this industry, and sorry to go on, I thought we only had to fight the bad guys. I genuinely did. But we didn't realize we had to fight the egos, arrogance, and ignorance in the marketplace, not just because of a lack of education and knowledge, but a lack of the desire to learn. One of my favorite quotes from Churchill was, "I love to learn, but I loathe being taught." And I think it's so profound because personally, my journey in pure out and out cybersecurity has been 6 years. And I've lived this and immersed myself for 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for the last 5.5, 6 years. I've written 4 books on the subject. I was made a fellow of the Cyber Theory Institute in 2022 and cited as the global expert. Now, does that mean my benefit, I guess, there is that I didn't come with the baggage and the false narratives that were pushed out to the academics of the world. I am teaching attorneys and professors all over the world about this area that's now 40 years old. That's quite an incredible thing. So I always say this to people, none of us know everything. Please just listen, understand, do your research. I remember writing for the Cyber Theory Institute in 2021. The late, great Steve King asked me to write a paper. As indeed did in 2020, I wrote a paper for the Worshipful Company of Information Security Professionals in London, all part of XGCHQ 5 and 6, etc. And Steve King asked me to write this paper, and I wrote it, and he said, my team won't publish it. It's too far-fetched. They don't understand what you're talking about, DNS. What is all this stuff? The same company made me a fellow the following year and cited me as the global expert because they went on an education program themselves to understand what I was talking about. So now we have governments finally looking at PDNS, which, trust me, it's a waste of space, but it's something, and I've told them as such. I'm very black and white. PDNS is an afterthought. And you've got the dilemma, again, without trying to be too contentious, you've got the dilemma of the intelligence agencies still very much relying on DNS as a surveillance capability. So do they want to make it the order of the day for everyone to start securing? Possibly not. They may have an ulterior motive. But what I'm saying to organizations, and I don't care if it's the FBI or British Airways, whomever, there are 2 things that are for sure. One, if you do not secure, control, and manage your internet assets and DNS, you will suffer a cyber attack. You will. 2, if you do not do due diligence on your main providers, it could be a minor provider, but definitely your major providers, if you don't take due diligence, including their internet assets and their DNS servers, you are literally exposing yourself to easy access, which is happening every single day of the year. One thing that's really interesting here, and I'll give you an example. I'm not sure how many of you will remember Move IT cyber attack. 2022, I believe it was, an Australian company called Progress. And they actually are supposed to be in the cybersecurity business, and they do upgrades that are supposed to be encrypted and secure and everything. Well, all of the big 4 suffered a cyber attack. Move IT suffered a cyber attack. I think 3,000 clients suffered a cyber attack, and it was all attributed to Move IT's upgrades and updates and patches and nefarious content. We reached out to Move IT because Move IT were using the same servers as all of the victims of this knock-on, it was called the Move IT massive cyber attack across the world, caused massive outages. Two things that are really pertinent here. One, not all victims were Move IT clients. They weren't using the same software that Move IT was providing, although they got embroiled in with the same attack. Two, they were all using the same servers. Think about that. So it wasn't Move IT. Move IT were a victim as much as anyone else were. But it got attributed to Move IT because we all like to have attribution. And I'm sure, I can't recall whether China or Russia were blamed, but one or t'other would have been blamed, and that would have been attribution done. Insurance companies would pay out, and everyone would say it was a terrible thing. Those servers are still insecure to this day, waiting for the repeat, the sequel. So my message to everyone, and Margaret, I'm just about to wind up, I think. My message to everyone, we can ask as many questions as you want, is if you leave this area and you do not control, manage, or have knowledge of it, you're wasting every single penny you spend on security. We showed this to the Bank of America 3 years ago. He's no longer there, and I'm sure he's happy. His name was Nicholas Peach, and you never forget those names. Nicholas Peach. He was head of security for the Bank of America when Diamond turned around, or one of their top men, said, we spend $1 billion on security. And I went to Nicholas Peach and I said, you're wasting $1 billion on security. So he said, what do you mean? So I said, well, here's a website that Bank of America login that's not secure, totally not secure. It happens to be ultra high net worth login details. Do you think that might be a target? And he said, Andy, that can't be true. That can't be true. So I showed him the details. He insisted we wouldn't normally send this stuff over the internet. He insisted. They shut the website down the next day. The reason why is because it was a back door. It was a back door into Bank of America, and they were wasting $1 billion. You cannot have security if you don't deal with your internet assets and your servers. You just can't. It's impossible. We can tell a company's security posture, and we've offered this to insurance companies many times in a scorecard type of relationship. We can tell you in typically minutes of whether a company is exposed, woefully exposed, or just waiting for the attack in flight. Without that knowledge, you're literally wearing a blindfold. You cannot have security. And I don't care if that's the World Health Organization or the World Bank. Doesn't matter. We've helped NATO, we've helped the FBI, we've helped the CIA, we've helped the US government, the British government. People lack this knowledge because they weren't taught it. That is not being condemning them, but we're saying, please, now you need to understand. You need that knowledge. And if you don't have it, we're happy to share it and impart it with you. It's certainly something you need. Larry, I think you got your hand up there as far as I can see. But you need to put your mic on.
Yes, Andy, a very lucid and wonderful presentation, affirming a lot of my own viewpoints and fears. I won't go into that. Two things. First of all, this points directly at the root cause of all these difficulties as a human problem, not a technology problem, in that the lack of education or the lack of implementation. And I like to joke sometimes that I'm writing a book called No One's Really That Stupid, Are They? And this could add another chapter to it. From that viewpoint, how stupid do you think we really are out here? Or are there other, as you had said, nefarious inferences that can be drawn from this?
Let me be a little bit contentious, Larry.
Okay.
I think the world revolves around the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. Okay? There are 3 companies that own 98% of the military-industrial complex: BlackRock, State Street, and the other one escapes me for the minute. We'd be very naive, bearing in mind that the annual spend on national security for the military of America is around $3.5 to $4 trillion. 2.5 times that is lost to cybercrime every year, and it's going up. We must also acknowledge that attribution for cybercrime is very rare. You'll see the FBI say, oh, we've broken this malware group or this ransomware group. It doesn't touch the sides, in truth, of the changes. In 2020, we helped the FBI when we found a Korean server inside vote.gov. And again, it's public knowledge now. And what that was doing in the lead up to the 2020 presidential elections was siphoning off up to 300 million US citizens' PII data, personal identifiable information, to Korea. People always say, Andy, north or south? Make your own mind up. Consequently, the FBI closed down the server, but it highlighted two things. One, nobody was looking. Nobody. I can't tell you how long it was there, but it had been there for some time. Two, they had to educate themselves to do some defensive work as opposed to offensive, because they'd been very good. In my books, I write about a guy called Jim Gosler, Gosler. If you don't know him, look him up. Jim Gosler was known as the cyber offensive godfather, and he was the director for the CIA for many, many years. In 2001, 5 months before the Twin Tower attacks, Jim Gosler was quoted as saying this: either the intelligence community would learn to adapt or the internet would eat them alive. Okay? What he saw, and he's still alive, he's a very interesting guy. He lectures all over the place. What he saw was when he first took the position working as offensive cyber security head for CIA, NSA, and others, he saw his team grow from 2, one offensive, one defensive, to tens of thousands, virtually all offensive. Okay? So going back to, as you recall, and I've got a question there. I have papers on this. I'm happy to share papers on this. What we saw in 2019 when CISA finally, and I use that word really strongly, finally said we need to start telling the world about DNS tampering and abuse, they'd been doing it for 20 odd years, was only because they weren't in a position to defend their own, because they never thought to. They went all out on offensive, and Jim Gosler saw his team grow from 2 to tens of thousands, all on defense. Because here's the thing, all on offense, not defense. Defense isn't sexy. You don't win from defense. All you can do is protect. Okay, so people come up to me and go, oh, Andy, you're a racing driver, you're doing this. What are you doing defending the world, trying to make it safer? Surely you should be attacking it. Oh, it's a bad world if we do that. So 100%, Larry, people need to wake up and smell the coffee. Yes, stupid is a strong term. I use the word arrogant and ignorant, and they're quite strong terms too. But if you said to me, Andy, could you explain to me how brain surgery works? I'd say, Larry, I've no idea. I'll put my hand up. I wouldn't second guess. But I certainly, if you were a brain surgeon, I wouldn't go around saying, oh, that Larry doesn't know what he's talking about. I know better. That's the problem you've got today, is you've got egos, arrogance, and you've got people in leadership that don't understand this, and they think you're trying to sell something as opposed to really help them. That's a sadness. So I don't know how we get around that, because these are facts. I'll tell you a story just for 1 minute. I won't name him because he's a friend. He is the chair of the Worshipful Company of Information Security Professionals. Okay. 35 years GCHQ. Technical coming out of his ears. Here's me, a freshman in the industry, 3.5 years ago. In 2020, he says to me, Andy, we would like you to write an article on PKI, please. We're going to publish it. So I said, okay. And you can look it up. The title is called The Digital Enigma of Digital Certificates, or The Modern Enigma of Digital Certificates. It's a play on the Enigma machine. So everyone that knows digital certificates and public key infrastructure knows it encrypts and decrypts and allows you to change things. Unlike the Enigma machine, you don't have to throw it away. You can just upgrade the encryption, etc. So I wrote this paper. I wrote my first book in 2 weeks. So I'm a prolific writer. I wrote this paper and I sent it to this chap. And he said, Andy, it's beautiful. Can we change it? Can we move it around? Absolutely. Do you want? Here's some pictures. You might. So he publishes it in this magazine. It's called the Digital Forensics Magazine. And anyone who's anyone is a former 5-6 GCHQ person within this fraternity. So he said to me, Andy, look, you got 30,000 people follow you on LinkedIn. Could you publish it? I'd like, well, I wrote it. Of course, I'm delighted to. So I go to publish it. He sends me the link and I said, there's a small problem. He said, what's that? I said, it's not secure. You've sent me this URL and it's not secure. I can't publish this on a not secure. It's really bad for me. So he said, you don't know what you're talking about, Andy. So I said, hold on. Go on the link yourself. It's not an opinion I'm making here. It's an observation. So he goes on the link eventually and he goes, oh my God, it's not secure. And I didn't make it up. So I said, do you want me to help you? He said, Andy, I'm 35 years GCHQ. I'm the chair of the Worshipful Company of IT Security. I don't need it. So he goes away. An hour later, he phones me up. He said, I can't find the problem. So I said, would you like me to help? He said, would you mind? So I said, okay. I said, stay on the line. I go, blah, 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 blah. I said, there's the problem. The HTTP isn't redirecting to HTTPS. The digital certificate you got on there isn't even in use. So it's all in plain text. So he goes, hold on. He said, I hadn't sent it to HTTPS. Took 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Now, the dilemma with that, Larry, is, look, you've got this egotistic scenario. Mm-hmm. Call it whatever you will.
Yeah.
But the real danger is someone with that experience, knowledge, and background, with the database of 5, 6, and GCHQ members with all their personal data, all being exposed unknowingly to the chair, who needs, required on that occasion, me to say, it's not secure. That highlights another issue. People aren't looking. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, look, we're all human beings. If something happened to an organization that you were chairing or you were the executive of or the CISO and the proverbial hit the fan, would you be the first to put your hand up and say, yeah, I made a mistake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
That's human nature.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but most people will want to point fingers. TfL are doing it right now. They're saying, oh, it's Cisco's fault. Mm-hmm. But I've gone, well, hold on. What about what I told you in August last year? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what they do. So they dance. Governments are very good at it.
Andy, I come at this from almost 40 years of quality management experience, and the 1 and 2 number of requirements are safety and security.
Yeah.
And if you're going to make any decision in this world and ignore those requirements and the kind of information you have, it's stunningly similar to what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I can quote that famous cybersecurity expert, Forrest Gump. Yep. Stupid is as stupid does, Andy.
Well, look, Larry, you've got these problems too. That you look at CMMC. Are you familiar with CMMC?
No.
It's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model in America. Okay. It's been around in various incarnations since 2004, so 20 years. Every supplier to the United States government, and as much as we hate it or love it, everything filters through from the States. NATO, wars in Ukraine, wars in Israel, is filtering through. There's a directive and a push for whatever. CMMC is supposed to say to you, if you're Boeing, you're Lockheed Martin, you're any of the companies that are providing services to the United States government, you need to adhere to these regulatory compliance issues. Not one of the United States government suppliers are adhering to CMMC to this day. Not one. So you've got to ask the question, are we busy fools, or is there a different narrative and an outcome objective that, you know, I touched on it and I was contentious and I'll be contentious. Do the military industrial complex want and have a need for cyber security issues, exposure, and war because it makes money?
Well, you have to ask the question, why would you have any kind of open border in cybersecurity or physically in the geography?
Yeah.
So
yeah. What happened, Larry, look, I'll gladly share this. And Margaret, I'm happy to share this paper. We wrote a paper for JFHQ, which, if you don't know, is Joint Forces Headquarters. It's the highest clearance in America. And last year, an F-35 ejected its pilot. You'll all remember in September. It ejected the pilot. We wrote a report on that shows Lockheed Martin, Chris Blake, and Green Hill Software, the three main protagonists that build those planes, 100 million each. We all show that none of them are secure. Okay, so backdoor access is possible by anyone. Now, let me go a little bit further because, you know, let's go crazy. On the 11th of January, 2023, we are the people that showed the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, that they'd lost command control of their NOTAM servers. For anyone who's in the avionics, they will know what a NOTAM server is. For those that don't, it's the notice to airmen. Sexist, I know, it doesn't include notice to ladies. It's just notice to airmen. But you are not allowed to fly a plane if you don't have that connectivity with the pilot and the ground. So here we are 6 hours ahead of America, there or thereabouts, and we get a notification that the FAA are considering shutting down the airspace. So we do some research very rapidly, and we find that the NOTAM servers aren't under their control. Okay, so they shut down. So we sent emails and threat intelligence to them. Lives were at risk, so we weren't redacted. We were sharing information real time with them. And within 2 weeks, they shut down the airspace. You'll know that. They shut it down, and we think the cost was about $8 billion for that one day. We cannot deny or confirm if a ransom was paid.
Yeah.
Let me stress that. We cannot confirm or deny if a ransom was paid. What we can tell you is later that day, they took back control of their servers. Okay? And flights were resumed. Major chaos. Now, 9 months later, so hold that FAA shutting down the airspace. Please don't forget this. That means no US Air Force flights, no Air Force One flights. The entire United States was grounded. No air defense. Hold that thought. In September, the third F-35B, really important, the 35B, there are three variants, A, B, and C. A is either short or long takeoff, B is vertical takeoff, and C is either long or short, whatever the A is, I forget. Aircraft carriers, normal land strip, and so the B is the only variant that does not need pilot interaction to eject. Okay? Because it's a precarious liftoff, if someone took over command control of a server or the ejector seat, it can eject the pilot unknowingly. So you've got the FAA shut down the entire airspace. You've got the third, you can look it up, it's on Google, the third F-35B, never an A or a C, because the pilot needs to do it. But the B, if the software was compromised, which we strongly suspect it was and is, ejects the pilot. The plane becomes a 100 million missile. doing whatever damage it can do. In that case, in September, I think it flew for an hour and crashed in South Carolina. It didn't kill anyone, but it crashed in the woods. But now think about this, because now I'm going to be really contentious. On the following day, Lockheed Martin get a phone call for a $100 million order for a new plane. Good business.
Resupply.
Absolutely. It's $1 trillion. The F-35 program is $1 trillion business. And we were gaslighted by JFHQ when we shared the report with them. It's now a year old. I shared it with the Secretary of State yesterday. I've shared it with the MOD here in the UK. As you may know, the F-35 is being bought all around the world. It's a really scary prospect. Now, let's say what I'm saying to you is not true. Thank you for that, Tom. Let's say what I'm saying to you is a hypothesis and just crazy. And I'm a crazy guy. Why have we helped the FAA and got emails to thank us, and the FBI and others? The Trident submarine program we could go into. I think we best leave it there. But it's a very precarious position that we're in. The taxpayers are being blindsided all day, every day, and they have no idea. I've got daughters, and they're on social media all the time. They have no idea. You've got TikTok banned in America. You've now got the other one, Telegram, being banned. They're as secure as everything else. It's just they're not owned by the United States. That's the only difference. The data is being collected by everyone, everywhere, but they don't own TikTok and Telegram. So that's why they rat in their cage and Sabre.